Well, good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for being here. Let me offer up a word of prayer, if you would please. Bow your heads with me. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the day you've given us, Lord, for the sunshine that we can enjoy, and just the way you take care of us, meet our needs, the way you bless us, Lord. Just thank you for the opportunity we have to serve you today. Lord, just thank you for this food and those that serve it, bless our bodies, Lord. Lord, just especially thank you for Skip and Barbara being here. Lord, for their willingness to share with us from their heart. Lord, this far-reaching topic of addictions. Lord, as Bill said, if it hasn't affected our families personally, it's affected those that we know as friends. We just thank you for Skip's openness and his willingness to share from his heart. Lord, we just thank you for that. Lord, thank you for this day and bless our time together. In thy name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, John. We're going to spend the next 50 minutes to 60 minutes talking about a very, very tough topic. And I want to thank everyone for committing the time, both MHPT folks, spouses. We are in the process of taking this so it can be taken to both our Fort Worth office and our Austin office, as well as Lubbock. And it's a very important topic. Bill and I talked about this right after the first of the year, and we felt like this may be the most important meeting that we'll have had at MHPT since we formed in 1996. Why is it important? Well, many of you knew Patrick Turner, and I want to just make sure everyone in the room is sort of on the same wavelength. So I want to go back just a little bit. Patrick was with us from December of 2008 to August of 2012. He won his way into our hearts. It was a short period of time, and we lost Patrick New Year's Eve, 2012, from the disease of addiction. It's a disease that affects us all. We'd be hard pressed in today's world if we took a poll to not have 100% of us have it, either within our family or, as John said in his prayer, folks close to us affected. We want to honor the time that Patrick was with us by this meeting. The fact that Skip and Barbara would come and share their story and their comments is unbelievably important, as you'll hear. But it's not only a story of addiction, it's a story of hope. Both of those are possibilities for us all. Both touch us all, as it certainly did Patrick. Addiction's at our front door. It's affected our family. Our nephew is trying desperately to put his life back together after serving 2 years in a state prison in East Texas, and with time left remaining before it because of addiction. Finally, and maybe most importantly, Bill and I feel that hope is like grace. It's there for the asking. There's a better way than the way Patrick knew. And it's that hope that we hope this opportunity together will create. So I'm going to ask Bill to introduce his pastors, Skip and Barbara. And again, I thank you for your time.
Coming back from Arizona this year, I was thinking about Patrick. And I got a call out in the middle of nowhere as I was driving back, and it was Don. And Don said, are you experiencing the same things I am about this young man that just passed away? And I said, it's a fine thing, I guess, because that's exactly what I was thinking about. I said, that's been very heavy on my heart. I've never met a young man that had more talent, more personality than Patrick. And he said, we got to do something. We got to do something for our people. He said, we're all suffering with this loss, but we've all faced this same thing. And so we started thinking, and it didn't take us very long to come to the conclusion that the very best people in the world to talk to our group would be Skip and Barbara Ryan. My brother, who's 10 years younger than me, had the opportunity, after an addictive problem, after being arrested, to go straight. And the judge basically told him, you're from a good family, you've got no prior history. We'll test you randomly, and if you can pass these tests, everything will be fine. He failed the test. And the judge again said, I'm going to give you another chance. I never do this, but I just believe there's something there. He failed another test, and he went to jail for a year. I'm telling you, it's everywhere. Mindy McCready, the country western star, just yesterday committed suicide, 37 years old, a total waste. Everyone in this room, everyone on this planet, you may agree or may disagree, but the devil's got a target on our back, and he's trying to hit every one of us. And the higher profile we are, the more he's after you, and the bigger pelt on his belt if he can get you. We're all sinners. We're all falling short of the grace of God. We fall short of His will, but we're all trying. It's not about the sins that we commit. It's not about our frailties. It's about how we deal with those. And let me tell you something. I've never, ever seen a better example of somebody that made some mistakes. They didn't hide those mistakes. They dealt with them straight on in a very public way, and that would be Skip and Barbara. Skip was the first pastor in our church, Park Cedars Presbyterian, back in 1992. He served there as a senior minister until 2008. He might be the smartest guy I know. The only one I know that's smarter than he is would be Barbara. He's a doctor of divinity. He had graduated from Harvard in his undergraduate studies. Barbara graduated from the University of Virginia as a lawyer. She practiced law for years, part-time. They've got 3 great kids. One, their youngest, Becca, has some learning disabilities, severe learning disabilities, and they managed all that. So I'm not going to steal any of their thunder except tell you these are my heroes, and if you will listen today, this might not save your life, but it might save the life of somebody that you love.
It is a privilege to be here. I am going to tell you, I'm going to be as brief and succinct as I can, but I'm going to tell you that we have a story together, Skip Ryan, my husband and I, of the stealth addiction, which was Skip's addiction to opiate medications, that created a decade of acute pain and distress in our nuclear family. And addiction is cunning, baffling, and powerful. Quote from the AA Big Book. And it's an equal opportunity employer. It's no respecter of persons. And there, but for the grace of God, go each of us. And there are addictions that will kill you, and there are addictions that will bind you and prevent you from being, and this is also in the big book, happy, joyous, and free. And that really is our goal in life. I want to speak about what does life consist of? Life consists of being rightly related to God and rightly related to man. And God's way is the best way. And to be a person who is walking in humility, with self-knowledge, with self-awareness, and with self-distrust in community, an honest community that can, by God's grace, typically remain emotionally and spiritually healthy. And what happened to Patrick, I would like to speak to briefly, even though I have a long story to say about what happened to us. Skip and I are in recovery, and once you go through a major upheaval like we did, we will always be in recovery. We live, Skip and I, with self-distrust. We live in an awareness of how quickly the things that compel less than desirable behavior is lurking at the door. There's a great verse in Genesis. Sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. And so the great hedge of protection of your mental and spiritual health is to live reflectively, to be self-aware. And the moment you move into stealth, hiding, deceit, and isolation, you are on a slippery slope. And that is what happened to our dear brother Patrick, who came into our life only 18 months ago. So you all know him better and knew him perhaps in his healthier and happier days. But Skip and I were given and are given a ministry of caring for folks in addiction. And we became close with Patrick and Tess in the fall of 2011. And for me, I had an immediate rapport with Patrick Turner because he and I both share verbal dominant qualities. We are talkers. And I met Patrick, and it was love at first sight. We were just so verbal, and his beautiful wife Tess and Skip are naturally more reticent and thoughtful people. And so we formed a wonderful friendship immediately with Patrick and Tess, where I kind of was Patrick's big sister, because not only am I verbal, but I'm also stubborn. And that is what I have to lean against. And that's what Patrick unsuccessfully needed to lean more firmly against, was the idea of autonomy, which is the lie of addiction. No one is being hurt by this. It's just my autonomous little thing. I still love you, Tess, as Skip was. I love you, Barbara. This is not impacting that. I love you. I'm just doing this little thing, this little addictive thing. And so addiction is cunning, baffling, and powerful. There is a strong field of science called epigenetics, which is to say there is not a gene, a mutation in a chromosomal strand that can predict whether or not you're going to be an addict. But epigenetics, which is the influence of ancestry, is very, very strong. 50%, if you have addictive tendencies in your family tree, then you really need to be super vigilant. If you start doing something obsessively, repetitively, and with negative consequences, and over the objection of others. And then the other quality is the need for more. And so, and the Bible is full of incredible wisdom, including wisdom for addiction. And there's a proverb that says, "Do not stare long at wine in the cup." and do not mix wines. And that is actually how the hook of addiction was established in Patrick as early as in college, when he discovered that wine plus certain kinds of pills gave him a euphoric, compelling desire for more. Neurobiologically, that's a dopamine hit. And I went to a seminar just last fall, and Eric Nestler, who used to be at UT Southwestern, who's a world-class addictionologist at this seminar, just said, just to give you a context, that eating a great meal increases your sense of well-being, your dopamine, by 50%. Smoking a cigarette increases your dopamine by 200%, which was a surprise to me. But a hit of methamphetamine, of crystal ice, is such a rush, 1100% dopamine hit. Now, you do that once, you're okay. But neurobiologically, the repetition causes the neurotransmitters in your brain to be damaged, so that the normal ships of well-being no longer fit in the port of well-being. And so you need more. And again, the book of Proverbs is full of wisdom about not mixing wines and being hyper vigilant, not to go down the trail of repetitive looking and using, lest you become the stag that is caught fast. And so the hook of addiction was set up in, I'm not positive about all of his genetic predispositions, but I would submit that he had a genetic predisposition towards addiction. The hook was set by the mixture of wine and pills, and the things that I just said you'd be very, very wary of would be use with negative consequences, use over objection of others, tolerance and the need for more, and stealth, deceit, being in a shadowy place. And whether that is a process addiction, where you're doing something that you're sort of ashamed of, the excessive use of the internet, even if it's not pornography, but it's just excessive checking, whatever. You can be grooving your brain, making the normal sense of well-being elusive to you, and you have Monday Night Football. We want to be happy, joyous, and free. So we need to always test and examine ourselves in light of what I've just said and say, is this thing that I'm doing, is it just me, or is it the precursor to being in bondage to that substance or that process? So Patrick came into our life, and keep your heart with all vigilance. He was not keeping his heart with all vigilance. He had swallowed the hook. I'm close to his mom, Judy Turner, and she called it the beast of addiction. And I think of the imagery, and I don't know why, but this has always been frightening to me since I was a little girl, but little ducklings on the water with snapping turtles down below, reaching up and, grabbing them by their feet and pulling them under. And Patrick was fighting the good fight against addiction. He was actively participating with Skip and with me in a small group, a recovery group, a discussion group. But underneath the surface, that snapping turtle had a hold of his little webbed foot and was not letting go. And some of you know that, I'll just tell you that there's something called disinhibition, that if you're doing a risk-taking behavior and if you're in stealth here, it sometimes will morph over into a cross addiction. And so he began to become very erratic in his private life, and it was very bewildering to us. We who loved him, his wife, Skip, and me, were very bewildered. And I want to say that those of you that were close to Patrick, I love him. I still love him, always love him, can't wait to see him in heaven, free from the snapping turtle that was holding him down, not letting him get mature adult wings to fly. But anyway, I think I've lost my train of thought here. the beast of addiction was holding him down, and there was this erratic behavior that really did not make sense. And what I wanted to say, and I've already said it to the head table, was that MHBT was marvelous. Because if you do have a loved one, love does have limits, it does set boundaries and expectations, and unfortunately, logical consequences for sinful, addictive behavior, especially with those neurobiologic changes, have to come to an individual in order that they would cry out for help. A true moment of grace, which did happen to Patrick in August. Patrick did cry out for help for himself. Others had been saying, you have a problem. But his strong counter will and his strong autonomy, he wasn't hearing that. But he did cry out for help in August. He did choose and organized himself to go to treatment. He was in treatment all fall. He was graced. He was supported. No one failed Patrick. His parents did not fail Patrick. We who were close to him, we did not fail Patrick. You as a company did not fail Patrick. I believe what happened in the end, sadly, was that for lack of a good aftercare plan, when you have addiction at that level, self-distrust and autonomy, without self-distrust, that sense of I can handle it, autonomy, will kill you. And there's a verse in the Proverbs that says, he who trusts in his own mind is a fool. And I don't want to say that Patrick was a fool, but he did not have an aftercare plan. He came home from treatment on December 19th, thinking that he would go through the holidays and then get into sober living, and he relapsed. And you all know the outcome. And he was graced, he was loved, he was supported. He did die alone. It is a tragedy. But as I said, I had lunch with his wife just a few weeks ago. Not his wife. I'm close to his wife too, and she's very grieving. She's grieving greatly that addiction took her husband and did not let the jaws holding onto the webbed foot of that little duckling, Patrick, never were completely released. But I was with his mother, and she said, we prayed and prayed for him to be released from, delivered from the beast, healed from the beast. We did not expect God's healing to come in the form of his death. But we know that he is healed, and we know that he is in heaven. And to God be the glory for that. And we talked, Patrick and I talked on weekends often, and we texted, and the last text, I actually put him on the plane for treatment on August 23rd and gave him Skip's Bible and my copy of Thomas à Kempis's Imitation of Christ. And the last text that I received from him in December, right before he came home, was this. It's a quote from Thomas à Kempis's Imitation of Christ. He said, I read this morning, "It is vanity to love what passes quickly away, and not look ahead to where eternal joy abides." And so that is a comfort to my heart, and I hope it comforts your heart, that he did have eternity in his heart. He was fighting the good fight. Autonomy, not having an aftercare plan, not being in community, prevented him from getting the lift off to get out of the mire of his addictive current. It's a current that will take you until by grace you're extricated. And then when you're extricated, you need a community of support. And by God's grace, our story has a happy ending, because I'm going to now have Skip come and share how he became addicted and how, by God's grace, and through hard work and through the passage of time, because it starts as a choice. It starts as a sinful choice, but then addicts forfeit choice. You think you're controlling it, and then it controls you because of these neurobiologic changes, where the amygdala, which is your primitive brain shouts down the cerebral cortex, which is your thoughtful brain. So instead of I want it, it becomes I need it for this illicit activity or this substance. And you are really medically unwell, psychologically unwell, and spiritually unwell. And the only other thing I'll say before I have my dear man come up is that there is no safe addiction. You are hurting someone desperately, yourself primarily, but your loved ones, if you are in an addiction. And I just urge you to get into recovery, and whether that's the addiction to a substance or my Al-Anonic tendency was I was addicted to trying to control my husband, because that's an Al-Anonic tendency. If you're living with someone, you want to control them. And sometimes, again, you have to let consequences come, let them have their moment of grace, and then through prayer and presence, you can support them as they move into recovery. And so we all need to stay really in tremendous self-distrust and humility in order to be healthy. And we all need to cultivate practicing the presence of God. Maturation is delaying gratification, saying no to the temptation, and saying yes to taking every thought captive to obey Christ, so that that thing you do less. Total abstinence, just medically speaking, needs to happen for the neurobiologic recovery of the normal ability for the ships of well-being to get into the courts of the neurotransmitter synapses, to let those heal. So if you're doing something that you're convicted maybe not ideal, then set just a 90-day goal to not do that thing and to get into a community of support and break your secrecy and become a healthy, joyous, and more free person with humility, self-distrust, and in a community of support. So now I'm going to tell you, now that was my sad story because we did lose Patrick. I'm going to let my husband tell you the happy story of how we went from a decade of stress to years now of the best years of our marriage.
Thank you, sweetie. You always say it right. I'm going to jump right in and tell you my story, because I think Barbara's speaking on a kind of macro level about neurobiology and the kind of social implications and the things that go on in addiction in a big picture, but I think it helps to be illustrative with one person. Life has to be lived forward, but you can only really understand it backward. I don't know if you've ever thought of that. And when you look back at your life, you will sometimes see good things, but you also see sad and bad things. And the curious notion, actually, is that it is the sad and bad things from which we learn more than the good things. Good things just produce a kind of general feeling of goodness and a good moral story from your life or my life. But as I look back in my own life and I see sad and bad things, addiction being the biggest one of all, what I see is that I learned more about myself, about my world, about my faith from the difficult things than I did from the good things. Adversity introduces us to ourselves. And so if you're in adversity of any kind, addiction or otherwise, the natural thing we want is to get out of it. We want the pain to go away. But the problem is that the way we deal with pain is sometimes legitimate and sometimes illegitimate. And I found an illegitimate way to deal with certain aspects of my own pain in my life. Our lives reveal much more than just a moral lesson. Our lives actually reveal how God rescues us, how other people help us. But it comes really as the function of honesty, of learning to be honest about ourselves. And this is something that's very difficult for people. It's very difficult for me. How do you know an addict is lying? His lips are moving. And people, when I talk about honesty, I'm actually not talking about cash register honesty. You know, if you get too much change from the cash register in the grocery store, you go and you take it back. But honesty at a deeper level about who you really are. To thine own self be true, Laertes said to Polonius in Hamlet, but not many people know the next line. To your own self be true, lest thee be false to any man. So we're false to others if we haven't learned how to be true to ourselves, what is going on in ourselves. St. Thomas, a medieval theologian, said, if you do not bring out what is within you, it will kill you. But if you do bring out what is within you, it will heal you. What we have to do is begin to discover some new ways in our own lives to deal with the things in our lives that are hurtful. Addiction is always, in any form that it takes, whether it's watching television 3 hours a night and having 3 beers, and that's just life for you. Every night, that's what you do. Which isn't a bad addiction, certainly not as bad as an opiate addiction, but it's still an addiction. It's a habit that you're doing in order to relieve pain in your life. And the answer to relieving pain is to face the pain honestly and where it came from. And that's what I wasn't able to do. I grew up in a family where performance, where being perfect, where pleasing other people was paramount. My mom was a beautiful, beautiful woman. She was a Vogue model in the 40s. She was lovely, but she came from a family where alcoholism had just completely dominated her life. She was an only child. Her father died of alcohol-related diseases when he was 47. She was sent off to a boarding school when she was in 7th grade and virtually never came home. So what does this produce in a person? It produces a person who outwardly wants to be good and look good and act good, but inwardly there's enormous doubt, enormous fear, enormous insecurity, and inability to really be at peace. And when parents experience that, they project that onto their children. Last time I checked with my kids, there is no such thing as a perfect parent. So we're all going to fail as parents. But sometimes the failure takes a direction that is very hurtful. Now, by saying that, I don't blame my mother or my father or anybody else for what happened to me. My fault was in the way I responded to things. I grew up as a kid that had to do it right, that had to be perfect, that had to impress you. And I did my very best to do that. I walked out on a stage in a junior high school play, a one-act play, when I was in 9th grade, and something clicked. It just said, this is where you need to be. This is where you can impress people. And I was in the theater for the next 10 years, amateur theater, a lot more than anything else. But I learned that I could, by my speech or in some way, I could please people. And the pleasing of people became, in a sense, its own narcotic. It became, in itself, a kind of addiction. Well, somewhere along the line, I shifted from the stage to the pulpit. And out of deep convictions as a Christian, I wanted to speak of the gospel. I wanted to help other people understand the truth that I had come to understand. And in the way things worked out, I was the pastor for 30 years of 2 very large, very successful churches. One in Virginia and one here. And it looked good from the outside. But inside, I was racing harder and harder and harder to please, to be perfect, to perform for you, to perform for the people in the church, to do everything right. You know what? Barbara's right. I'm more of an introvert than I am an extrovert. Do you know what happens when introverts are always out there trying to please people and make stuff happen? They get tired. They get really tired. And it took me about 23 years out of 30 years in ministry to get tired, really tired. And inwardly I began to hate what I was doing. I loved Sunday morning. It was full of performance and there was great stuff going on there. But the rest of the week, I didn't like what I was doing at all. I should have recognized that and done something about it. But instead, what happened was that I had been given, like a lot of you have been given, narcotic medicine when you are in pain for one thing or another or minor surgery. one day I had a really bad headache, and I said, you know, if I take that medicine that I took a couple months ago for something else the doctor had prescribed it for, I might be not have my headache today and be able to, you know, carry on with my day and get a lot done. And I did. Alarm bells should have gone off in my mind. You never take prescription medicine for something other than what it is prescribed for. But I did. And then I did it again a little while later. And then again, and very, very slowly over a few years, I became addicted to this medicine. And I never would have even used the word addiction in reference to myself. I never used the word addiction until I was 4 weeks into the first treatment center I went. I was still in denial. That's another thing about addicts, is they always deny the reality. They always miss the obvious. Everyone else around an addict knows what's going on. They can see something wrong, even if they don't know exactly what it is. Just like Barbara saw it in me. Elders in our church saw that things weren't great. My kids saw that something was wrong with me. They maybe didn't always know what, but they knew there was something obviously not going right. Reminds me of Connie Chung, the NBC News commentator from years ago. Lovely Chinese-American woman, grew up in Los Angeles. And she was walked to school every day when she was a little girl by her parents, and they would get almost to the school and she would want to leave them behind and walk into school herself because she said she didn't want anyone to know she was Chinese. Addiction is like that. It's like, I don't want anyone to know there's something really wrong, and yet most of the people around know. Now, in the case of alcohol, it's pretty obvious. There's a lot more obvious about alcohol. It smells, usually does something to a person's eyes or their behavior. Narcotic drugs, if you know how to manage them correctly, don't actually do that. And I began to take more and more and more. And then I had a problem. Where am I going to get them? So I started lying to doctors. How about that, folks? A minister of the gospel is lying to doctors in his church about why he needs narcotic medicine. And things went from bad to worse. Barbara and I found ourselves at a treatment facility in the spring of 2006. We were there not for any reason that related to me at all, different reasons altogether. And about the second day we were there, a guy named Doug, a counselor at this place, he was about this tall and about as wide. And he came up to me and he said, so you're a minister, huh? And I said, yes. And he said, well, what do you believe? And I said, well, I'm a Christian. I believe in the God of the Bible. And he said, oh, no. The God of the Bible is not your God. Your God is drugs. How did he know that? Well, he was a professional. He was an addictionologist. He knew, he saw something that other people didn't see. And a couple hours later, I said to Barbara, I need to be here. So we went for 4 days, and I stayed for 7 weeks. And during that time, I began to understand that more about myself, my past, why I had been drawn in to cover my pain in this particular way. I began to understand why it's so difficult for me to be honest about who I really was. You know, I'm absolutely convinced that if I'd been honest about the things that were going cuckoo in my life to the elders and the people of my church a year or even 6 months before the crash came, I think they would have said, oh, Skip, we love you, please, let's just find a way to help and move on. But what happened was that I was full of denial, I was full of dread, I couldn't admit what I had going on that was wrong, and as a result, I lost everything, almost everything. I lost my job as the minister of the church. I lost my calling, I thought I would never be in any kind of ministry again. And I almost lost my family. I mean, it was very, very close that Barbara's and my marriage made it. Our 2 kids who were college age at that time, very, very different reactions to what happened, which is the reality of what begins to happen in our lives when we start to be honest, the very thing we're afraid of, well, it does happen. You do lose. You are seen as somebody who isn't necessarily all together and has it all together and performs well. Guess what? That's the truth about you. It's the truth about me. We don't have it all together. And yet the performance treadmill that we're on, we feel like we have to act as if we do. But when you start to be honest, you may lose some things, but you gain some things. You really gain some things. You gain intimacy with people, both those who love you and those who share your problem. And you find out that when we admit weakness and need, we actually have a way of caring for people through our weakness and need that our strengths would never allow. People started coming to Barbara and me as I was getting better and we were beginning to resume our life, our marriage, and what became our ministry. They started coming to us and they said, we can't go talk to anyone else, but we think we can talk to you because you understand, you've been through it. And these are a lot of people in our church. It's sort of ironic. I had to leave the ministry in order to begin to really minister to people. Because people desperately need someone that they can tell, not just about the addiction, whatever form or shape it might take, but also about the underlying stuff that's going on underneath the addiction that has given rise to it. It was one of the happiest days of my life when about 2-3 years into this recovery process, when I realized how glad I was just to be one more bozo on the bus. And not have to be the big leader who had all the answers for everybody else all the time. But I could honestly admit weakness. I could honestly admit I don't know what to do about this or that. I'm not necessarily always the great leader you think I am. The elders of our church, the church where Bill and Cheryl and I and some of you go, were wonderful. They were unbelievably wonderful. You know what happens when there's a crisis with a senior minister in a large church? Well, the elders, they've got the church of 5,000 people, whatever it is over here, and they've got the minister and his family over here. And what they do, naturally, instinctively, is try and get this fellow and his family taken care of appropriately, but kind of pushed out of sight, out of mind, because they've got all these people to care for. The elders of our church refused to do that. They held on to both ends of the rope. They asked, they begged, really, Barbara and me to stay. Not just to stay in Dallas, but to stay at the church, because they said, it went bad for you here. Let's see how God heals you here. You could show our congregation a lot as you begin to get better. And as our marriage begins to get better. Barbara and I were married 30 years, 3 years ago, and we looked at each other on our 30th wedding anniversary, and we said, it has never been better. Never. In 30 years. And as I said to you, I would not have given you $1 for our marriage 7 years ago. God is a great healer, but he heals in the context of honesty. He heals in the place where we're willing to say, I need. I don't have it all together. I'm not perfect. The famous psychotherapist Carl Jung went through a really, really bad time in his life at one point. And he said, as he began to grow away from it, he said, you know, it cost me a lot to lose everything, but now I can begin to live again. I've been living again for the last 7 years. I've been living better and deeper and richer and more in love with my wife, more attached to my kids, more able to receive the ministry of my church, and now, by God's grace, to help give leadership to my church again. I'm able to do that far, far better than before. Because the big thing I was hiding from everybody, even myself, has been taken care of. Addiction is an absolutely compulsive thought that produces an irresistible physical need. An absolutely overwhelming thought that produces an irresistible physical need. It is a disease, as Barbara was explaining. You could call it a neurobiological disease. But unlike cancer or heart troubles, it's a disease in which we, the addict, also plays a part. So if I said to you, it's a disease, I can't help myself, it's like the devil made me do it or something. If I renounce responsibility, that's not true. That's not right. I did wrong. I erred. I did things that hurt myself, my family, my church, my community. But isn't that where God comes into our lives? When everything's going great, I don't know about you, but we kind of think, you don't need God so much. When everything's going just the way you want it to, we say, God, let's just carry on. We'll tip our hat at God. We'll go to church on Sunday. We'll put a little in the offering plate, whatever it is. But when is it that the Lord becomes real to us? When is it that God becomes real to you or to me? It's in our need. If I were going to pray for you, which I will, I try and pray for all the people that I get the privilege of speaking to about this now in my life, both before but also after, especially after. If I was going to pray for you, I would pray that God would give you the gift of desperation. And that you wouldn't hide from the things that are hurting you. But that you would begin to seek help for them where you can, and begin to admit that you're not perfect, and that you can't perform to everyone's standards. And that it's really, in the end, foolhardy to try and please everyone. That last bit about pleasing everyone? You know what I've learned in the last 7 years? What you think of me is none of my business. But what I think of what you think of me will kill me. And the only thing that really matters is what God thinks of me, and what I think of me, and what Barbara thinks of me. Now, I don't use that as a stick to beat people. I don't care what you think of me. What it represents, my dear friends, is a measure of freedom, internal freedom, that I never knew before. It's a way of saying, I can live true to who I really am, and I can actually begin to enjoy it. More people die every year in this country from narcotic drugs, from prescription drugs, and narcotic drugs especially, than die from heroin or cocaine use. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has found that narcotic addiction and death has risen 4 times over the last 10 years. It is curious and hard to learn that of every 10 deaths due to prescription drugs, 7 of them come from opiate or narcotic medicine. It is a far worse problem than the problem of street drugs, which I was spared from, and Patrick wasn't. And it's a far worse problem because they're very accessible. And do you know where 4 out of 5 people who are addicted to narcotic medicine get their medicine? Friends or family. 4 out of 5. And that is true even though the number of prescriptions that are being written for narcotic medicine has increased fourfold over 10 years, and the number of deaths as a result. You see, the statistics just simply support that we live hidden lives. 1 out of 4 of you are addicted to some substance or process. Seriously addicted. 1 out of 4. And by some measurements, that does not even include pornography, which is an overwhelming addiction, especially for men now. 1 out of 4. Who are we kidding? What would it be like if we could begin to find a few people we could tell our stories to? What would it be like if we could begin to live a different story because we know the story we've been living doesn't work? What would it be like if we could find God really helpful in a really practical place in our life, and not just the big spirit up there who sort of blesses us? I want to tell you that I think those things are possible. And I think they're possible because they've happened to me.